The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this video are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Control Plus Indie and its owner. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The Control Plus Indie name in all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. All information, images, videos, or any multimedia content shown in this show is copyrighted. All rights reserved for Zandev and the Bloodrite game.
Hello everyone, my name is Juan Jose, and today I'm proud to announce that on this episode of Control Indie, I have a very special guest. Someone who I believe has strong storytelling skills and is the creator of one of the best Geezy Doom games out there. I'm talking about the creator and developer of the one and only HEDON. Sen, welcome to the show. Well, first of all, thank you very much for being here to talk about your projects. It's always a pleasure to have people like you who are passionate about video games in the show. But before we talk about HEDON, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Zandev. I made HEDON. I guess as far as my career as a developer is concerned, I come from a background in architecture, and I have hobby level skills in like graphic design, maybe, 2D art essentially. Or at least I did when I was working on HEDON. I like to believe that I have been getting better at drawing textures and stuff. Really, there's not a lot of interesting things I can say about myself that don't concern the game. Obviously, probably people want to know first of all, what HEDON is, because maybe not everyone is familiar with it. It's essentially a retro FPS that runs on the Geezy Doom engine. And the Geezy Doom engine itself is a fan-maintained and updated source port of the original id Tech engine made by John Carmack, so the engine that the original Doom game ran on. Obviously, it's been modernized, and it's an excellent tool, and I'll mention that quite a few times in this interview. I'm pretty sure of it. And it's a retro FPS that takes cues from other genres like action games, a few cues from RPG game design, and I think more interestingly from point-and-click adventures, right? Because it's got that kind of like puzzle design that you'd usually find in point-and-clicks, in the classic point-and-clicks. So that's kind of like the genre description of the game. Unfortunately, up until this day, I haven't found a way to summarize what HEDON is about, so I have to take it like by piece by piece. As far as the thematic of the game is, basically you have this fantasy world that has this Deus Exian kind of magic implement, which is the magic crystals, right? So I like to call it Crystalpunk because even though it's fantasy themed, there's like bits of technology fused into it. You have like crystal powered weapons and devices, and the setting is in an underground part of the world, right? So you have a planet, and then there's like an interior world, so kind of like Jules Verne, Middle Earth type of thing, and the crystals essentially allow this place to thrive through their properties. The ones who are in possession of these crystals are the Iron Division, which is this Amazonian faction of goblins and orcs who are essentially trying to save their planet from an imminent demonic invasion. And with this setting, I think we can start talking about the game. No, I know you wanted me to talk about how the idea came to me, right? And I think it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly when it began, but like any other kid who plays video games, I always had an idea of what my ideal video game would be, right? Like I would daydream about it. So I think that kind of explains why HEDON is primarily such an eclectic kind of game. Like it borrows from various kinds of games, because when you're a kid, your ideal game may be like an MMO, or then it might shift towards an RPG. Then maybe you played some interesting RTS game and you're like, oh, okay, I could totally make it like an RTS. Yeah. So in a way, Hedon is kind of like a facet of that lifelong ideal game that I wanted to make. So it began in maybe 2009 or 2011. I don't even remember when I made Zan, because Zan is the protagonist of the game. She's like a half orc, half demon, like weird blue skin, buff lady character. And like many other characters from the game, she's a character that I used in RPGs. So that's usually how I come up with my my story and my characters. I like borrow from different places and then I try to give it its like an original spin or a personal spin to it. Yeah. So I would say that it was quite a while ago, if you think about it, like over 10 years ago for sure. And on top of that, you also had a period where a lot of FPS games and a lot of games in general sort of like swayed towards that post Half-Life design where they were becoming increasingly linear, hand-holdy, and obsessed with achieving photorealism above everything else, if you ask me. So I was kind of discontent with the way video games were going, right? I was not happy. And it just so happened that I started exploring some of the older video games. And I think the one that was the tipping point for me was Shadow Warrior, right? The original one on the Build engine. And I was like, hold on a moment, there's something to this game, right? I couldn't quite understand exactly, but I started playing more of these games and then I kind of like realized the design philosophy differences, right? Like these were games that were not linear, they were a lot more concerned with fun gameplay rather than telling an epic story or giving you an awesome quick time event or any of that stuff that was popular around that period. And yeah, it got me thinking. It got me more invested in like shooters and retro FPS games. And I think that the highlight of my journey was discovering Brutal Doom.
Yeah.
Brutal Doom is it was crazy. Like when it came out, it's this mod for the original Doom game that makes it over the top. But there's more to it. There's not just like over the top violence and weapons. It almost brings it to a modern day, like to the current capabilities of the GZ Doom game engine. And you know, some people even say that it inspired the 2016 release of Doom, right? Like some of the devs were inspired by Brutal Doom. And I certainly was. I played it with this map pack that was designed for it. It's called Extermination Day. And yeah, Brutal Doom with Extermination Day for me was the absolute best FPS experience ever. And not just the shooting was fun, there was some story to it that I really enjoyed. You weren't just like one guy fighting a demonic invasion. You were like teaming up with Marines and trying to be tactical at points. I have to mention that when I grew up with military simulators, right? So Delta Force was a big game for me, Arma, so on and so forth. So I always kind of like that tactical game edge that you don't really see in games like Call of Duty, really, and games that were popular at that time. So again, something in me was like, hold on, there's something to this. There's like, this game's legit. And what was more important was that it was mostly made by one guy, right? Yeah. Sergeant Mark IV. And, you know, with contributions from other people, but yeah, like, it was an example at the end of the day for me. It's like, okay, if one guy can make something like this, then what's stopping me? You know, even if I don't have any conventional game developer knowledge, I should give it a shot because Brutal Doom was a lot like what I wanted and what I was dreaming of making. So yeah, there you go. That's about 2017, 2016, we're talking right now. So that's kind of when I got serious about getting into game development.
We know that Doom is a major influence on the gameplay, and of course, if you look at the menu and inventory management, you can even see a little bit of hexen. But the story is so intrinsic and so tied to the gameplay that it's almost impossible to separate one from the other. Now that years have passed since the release of Hedon, and knowing that, as you said in an interview in 2022, At the time, you were working with a programmer and started using other tools outside GZDoom like Unity and Blender, if I'm correct. So, how do you approach game design and how do you come up with ideas now that you're a seasoned game dev?
I'm definitely more diligent about it, but the funny thing is, like I mentioned that Hedon was like a facet of the totality of my ideal game components that I had in my mind, and the one I'm working on right now is a different facet. So in a way, I'm kind of like just making another embodiment of my dream game, because obviously Hedon could only cover so much. So in this regard, it's been in me, right? It's been brewing in me for a long time. However, and I do mention this quite a lot, it's very important for me to write my ideas down, even if I don't do it in like a highly formal manner. Like essentially I have a notepad where I just, every time I have a good idea, I like slap it in there with like a bullet point. Another thing that I do is I start thinking about my future game even while working on my current game. So the game I'm currently working on, I started thinking of it while I was working on Hedon Bloodrite. Maybe it's worth mentioning, but Hedon is actually two games. It's the Hedon Crystal Heart. It was originally released as Hedon in 2019, and then I worked on a sequel, and they're both bundled together under the name of Hedon Bloodrite. While I was working on Hedon Bloodrite, I was already thinking about my next project, already writing down ideas. And the last 2 years, I basically spent just a lot of time building the setting. Yeah, there's not much I can tell because I don't want to spoil it, but
yeah.
Suffice to say, writing down things is important, right? As far as design goes. Another thing that's important for me, it's the level design. Like the world, the setting, the story, they all come together in the level design. And like I said, I have a background in architecture. So one thing I do is I make these quite accurate sketches of the level layout, right? So I just imagine the level, I just sketch it by hand, well, in Photoshop, still with a stylus in my hand, and this allows me to organize things, and it's kind of like the skeleton of the game for me. So yeah, imagine that, and I actually did this even with Hedon, especially with some of the last levels. I just had like a very accurate sketch that I could just put it down like a base layer and then just build on top of it. Yeah, there's the second thing that works really well for me. Other than that, I'm just trying to be more professional and more, I try to learn new things, to stay open to learning new things. Like, for example, today was the first day when I actually worked with a shader, which is actually weird because when you think that most of the things that I did was 2D graphics, and Hedon is ripe with everything is handmade, hand-drawn, like sprites, textures, everything. I never used the shader. Hedon, like GZDoom has some base ones for like water swirling and that kind of effect, but up until now I had to learn a new thing that maybe a formally trained game dev knows, but yeah, for me it's like now I feel like I need it, so it's time to learn it. So yeah, that would be another aspect, just being willing to always learn new things. And that's the reason why I dropped GZDoom, not because I don't like it, but because I can't be a one-trick pony. Like if I want to be a game dev, I should learn to use the standard tools. So yeah, there you go.
We all know that independent developers don't have sponsors to give money every time they want to, I don't know, change the computer graphic cards or something, But we know that many indie developers have to work a day job to be able to afford to live and work on their dream game in their spare time. So what technical, financial or emotional difficulties have you encountered along the way, and how you've been able to solve them?
Yeah, like I said, I started developing it for real in 2017, 2016. That's when I picked up GZDoom and I started actually learning. So it's not like I had spent a lot of time actually developing before that. It definitely helped that I was staying with my parents and I was studying at university and I had like a scholarship. So that saved me a lot of money and it also gave me some extra to spend on the game. I have to mention, I didn't exactly made the game by myself because the game does have some voice acting and of course the music, which was not made by me, right? And that's where most of the money went, to commissioning music, licensing some of it because some of it belongs to artists and bands that I liked and I kind of like collaborated with them. and of course the voice acting, which is not a lot. So yeah, Hedon was very cheap to make. Like we're talking a few $1,000s, couple thousand. When you compare it to games like it that had like even in the 90s they had like $1 million budget.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's fair that a lot of that budget went on actually physically producing the game and distributing it, right? Because you had to make the box, the CD, print some art on the CD, put the manual in there, distribute it across the world and so on and so forth. And that basically took most of the money. But nonetheless, I think that's one of the advantages of like a very small team or a solo dev. It's that you're gonna, if you're making everything yourself, you're gonna be saving quite a bit of money. So yeah, that's kind of like how the finances went. As for the technical difficulties, it was hard, very hard to get started, because if you're not a game dev, you're like not in the paradigm of making games. When we play games, there's that saying that everyone's a game designer. We always have an idea of like how we would make this game better. Like God knows, when I was playing World of Warcraft, I had million ideas of how I would improve the game and how I would balance the abilities and so on and so forth. But the reality is that once you get to working on it, you start realizing that, hold on, it's not so easy, right? There's compromises to make. There's things you can break while adjusting other things, and so on and so forth. It was very difficult for me to sort of like understand how a game is supposed to function, right? How to interface code with assets. For someone who has no idea about programming, that's a very difficult step to make. However, the saving grace was that GZ Doom is a very focused engine. Unity, Godot, Unreal, they're very powerful engines, but they give you nothing to start with, almost nothing. They're like a blank slate, and you're gonna open the engine and you're gonna be like, okay, where on earth do I start? Right? It's like you're dropped in a desert and like, yeah, go figure out. Yeah. With GZ Doom, it's pretty straightforward, and there's a lot of people who are using it already. So there was a lot of help. There's a lot of people you can ask, and a lot of the things, the way they're done, everyone does them the same. Yeah. So, and on top of that, GZ Doom also takes care of the programming side of the engine for you. So, for example, in GZ Doom, you already have player movement coded. All you have to do is, determine the speed at which the player walks and runs, and the height at which you crouch, and so on and so forth. In a big boy engine, as I like to call them, like in Unity, the first thing I had to do was code the movement from scratch, because the engine has no idea what kind of game I want to make, right? Do I want to make a first-person shooter or an RTS game? So, yeah, you have way more work to do if you're not using a highly specialized engine. And I think this is one of the best decisions that I made, was to just stick to an engine that was designed for, or rather I should say it was the other way around. I looked at GZ Doom, I understood what it's capable of, and I stayed within its boundaries and I worked with them. And back to technical limitations, this is the point that I want to make. The boundaries really help, right? The boundaries sort of like guide you forward in a way. So yeah, there was a certain magic to it, because to me it felt like it wasn't the case initially. People need to understand that I wasn't intending to make Hedon into like a commercial success or anything. For me, it was just making the game that I want to play, because I was so disenfranchised with the gaming industry at that point. So, I just made my own weird little game, and I posted it on the GZ Doom forums, and some people liked it, and that, made me like, okay, I should probably continue, and so on and so forth. And eventually, yeah, I released it. Initially, I released it for free. And then I was, okay, let's try and put it on Steam, see what happens. Because initially it was like on itch.io and IndieDB. And that's when the things kicked into higher gear. But yeah, emotionally, it was almost like addictive to work on it. Like I remember I had to work to do my university thing. That's already like a lot of time. So every single spare moment I had, no matter where I was, I'd just whip out my laptop and just work on Hedon. So for me, it was kind of like, yeah, it was addictive. It was a rush. And I think a lot of people who work on their first game and see that transition from like, you work on a lifeless piece of art, like on a sprite, and then you put it in there and you see it moving. It's almost like divine.
Yeah.
God, you're creating a world. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Hedon is a very complete and complex game in its story. Many players enter the world of Hedon expecting a fairly simple shooter, because unfortunately, when they hear that the game was developed with GC Doom, they mistakenly assume that it's run and shoot and go, when it's not. There's a lot of reading, a lot of key hunting, a lot of items to find, and the best part is that it's quite interesting. It's not filler that you have to read to get through the game. No, there's a lot of characters, and each one has a space, a race, or a world within the Hedon universe. So, how do you get your idea or concept of a character from your head into the game? Do you write the dialogue and then ask for proofreading, or how does this work for you in that aspect?
There was a time where no matter what you would create, it was original and fresh, especially with games in 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
I'm a game that kind of inspires my lore is, well, it's not a game, it's more like a franchise. It's Might and Magic, right? You probably heard of Heroes of Might and Magic and the Might and Magic games and so on and so forth. Now, Might and Magic also has this sort of blend between fantasy and futuristic sci-fi kind of stuff. Yeah. And that was, back then it was kind of like a new thing, unseen before. I remember playing. Have you played it? Have you played the Might and Magic games?
No, I saw gameplay, but I haven't played for myself.
Right. So when I was a kid, Might and Magic 6 was my first RPG. I played it when I was 12, I think. Mm-hmm. And at some point, spoiler alert, you find the blasters, right? Laser blasters. Yeah. Despite playing this traditional fantasy kind of game, at some point you're and I was wow, that's so cool. Imagine how bold you have to be to combine sci-fi elements with fantasy. And now, of course, I'm pretty sure that someone did that before Might and Magic. It was just the way I experienced it the first time. The point I'm trying to make is that nowadays there's dozens, if not hundreds of games released daily.
Yeah.
How much can we even talk about a game that's completely original?
Yeah.
It's mostly just remixes of ideas, right?
Yeah.
So the philosophy I have is, instead of trying to create something original, I want to take something that's pre-existing, right? So a pre-existing paradigm, convention, such as the fantasy convention. In a fantasy convention, you have the orcs. You expect the orcs to be and to behave in a certain way. You have the elves. Expect them to live in, the forest or whatever. You have high elves, there's certain expectations, right? That everyone kind of has at this point. So instead of trying to make new things, I try to take these pre-existing expectations and just give them a different spin. Like I said, just try to make them in my vision, and not just that, but also try to make a decent story, in the sense that, no plot holes, things should be explained to some level, things should make sense. Yeah, sure, you have magic crystals. I'm not going to explain the physics behind them, right? But I want to impose myself some limits and be okay, so crystals, right? There's multiple types of them. You have yellow crystals. What do? They're a power source, energy source. All right. They should stick to this design, right? You have the cyan, aqua kind of ones, which for me, they're these produce heat and electromagnetism and whatever, and they allow the flora to thrive underground. So I sort of try to set up my own boundaries, but then work with them and develop them, right? Yeah. I don't aim for them. I just want to create a credible, right? Not a realistic, but a credible and authentic world.
Yeah.
Because when you think about writing and storytelling, there's the imaginative side of it, But then there's also the technical quality of it. Like, how do you tell a story? Not just what kind of story do you tell? And I try to improve on that technical ability of telling a story. And yeah, I think that's basically what results in a game like Hedon. So that's for the setting. Now, for the characters, I did mention that Zan, the protagonist of the game, came to me while I was just essentially creating an RPG character a while ago for like a different game, I believe. Mm-hmm. I first made her in Neverwinter Nights, and funnily enough, she was like an elf rogue. So she was a rogue initially, and then I played World of Warcraft, where she was a troll rogue. So that's where I picked up the blue skin. And then at a later point, I played Terra, which is another MMO, and they have this like muscular kind of like race with like muscular women. And I was like, that looks kind of interesting, right? You don't. Yeah. At that point, they weren't so ubiquitous. Like most of fantasy attractive ladies in art were like, you know, typical elves, and you know, it was kind of like fresh to see, like, yeah, that looks kind of interesting with like a muscular woman and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like I let my imagination to build this character and add features to it, and another funny thing is I wasn't even set on using Zan as a protagonist. I was initially thinking about using an orc lady, but I don't know, something in me was like, hey, just use Zan. You know, she was one of my most beloved characters that I would make in RPG games. Hell, I even remember making her in Saints Row, like in one of the Saints Row where you like have blue skin and she had like, So that's basically how kind of like I'm making these characters, because when you try to role play with a character, you inevitably end up, building their character. Like you can imagine like a backstory, some context. I think one practical example of how I work is, so I mentioned Might and Magic, right? Recently, Might and Magic can be played in co-op, which for me was like a huge deal. And I actually got together with a bunch of friends and we did like a co-op run, and it's on YouTube. You can look for it. Just look for Might and Magic co-op and it's probably going to pop up. Yeah. There's not a whole lot of content about it. And that's, you can see me playing 3 characters. So we're playing Might and Magic 6, 7, and 8. And I play Lord Murguth, the Minotaur Pyromancer. Mm-hmm. And while playing the game, what I do is I impose some rules upon myself. So Murguth is a pyromancer. What is he gonna do? Well, I'm just gonna dump everything into fire magic, right? He's just all about fire magic. Nothing else. So yeah, you know, it's like I try to like create a character and limit it beyond the possibilities that are given to me. And again, like in Might and Magic 6, I play as Bendy, Earth Mother Bendy, which is like she's an enchantress, right? Earth Mothers in Hedon, they're like the spellcasters of the orcs, of the Iron Division orcs. So they dabble in like elemental magic, but Bendy in particular has a particular skill to enchant things. You know, that she's where you go to recharge your Psy Crown, for example. So she likes artifacts and stuff. And again, it's like I try to role play her in that spirit, right? So I kind of like limit myself. Nithriel is the antagonist of the game. I also played as her in Might and Magic 7 this time. And what I did is I tried to create this character that's very frail, right? So very physically frail and vulnerable, kind of like a glass cannon. She doesn't do damage, not a lot of damage, but she's incredibly good at support through things like slowing the enemy down, shrinking the enemy, mind controlling the enemy, you know, maybe even raising the dead, or basically creating all these obstacles and impediments to the enemy creatures. And in a way, that's kind of how she's in the game, right? Like she faces you, no pun intended, head on. Yeah. She's always got some tricks in her sleeve. Like she's not a physically strong character, unlike the protagonists. So I'm not gonna go into spoilers, right? But if you play the game and you look at how she acts and how she quote unquote fights you, the player, you're gonna see what I'm about. So look, the point I'm trying to make is be open to inspiration, right? Be open to inspiration and don't be afraid to use various mediums to like put your ideas into motion and have a look at them. See how they actually interact with a pre-existing system.
Yeah.
As for the dialogue, well, once you have the traits of your character, it's not that difficult to like imagine the way they would behave, right?
Yeah.
Hedon itself is not a very dialogue-heavy game, and part of that is due to technical limitations because, well, literally, I couldn't fit too much text on the screen. There's like an entire nightmare with UI scaling in GZ Doom, and it's been pestering me forever. But I think that leads to another kind of technique, if you will, that I'm trying to pick up, which is brevity, right? They say that brevity is the soul of wit.
Yeah.
So I want to be brief. Like when I write dialogue, I try to avoid redundancy, right? I try to think that the player's time is valuable and that I need to be very to the point. Another technique that I use is I try to avoid giving character names. So even in Hedon, you have like the Goblin Maid, the Advisor, the Curator, right?
Yeah,
so characters that don't really have a name, but they get referred to because, again, I think it simplifies things in the mind of the player, and I want to help the player digest the story, right?
Hedon has a lot up its sleeve, not only on the story level, but also on the gameplay level. Is there any particular feature or aspect that you are particularly proud of now that it's been years since the game was released and you can look back on it from a distance? Is there anything in a way, shape or form that you feel like, hey, I put that in the game and it feels great that I did that?
Funnily enough, there's something that's particular to GZ Doom, and I like to refer it as the kinesthesia of GZ Doom. So, like I said before, everything in Hedon is handmade, right? That also involves a lot of obviously the level design. Walk into a room, there's gonna be some chairs and a table, and all these things have been handmade by me, right? Like I had to extrude the sectors and then prop up the 3D sectors and whatever. It's technical terms. But the thing is, when you walk on them or next to them, you can feel every little crevice of it. Yeah. Like your character collides with them to a degree where a lot of games don't. Like, that feeling that most, especially like AAA games, that it's kind of like floaty, like you're almost inside a balloon when you're walking through a level or colliding with objects. And obviously that's made so that it it allows for the NPCs to pathfind better. It prevents something that happens in Hedon, which is the player can get snagged onto level geometry, and that's annoying. But it's you can have both. Like you either have like that's what I'm talking about, and it's more the merit of GZ Doom than mine. Really, it's like the kinesthetic feel. It feels solid. It feels like you're grounded. I don't know how to explain it. And I've had some friends mention this too. It's like the game just feels good. So that's something that I'm probably not going to be able to reproduce in the game that I'm working on right now. I'm definitely going to try to maximize it, but I can already see how there's some obstacles in the way. And most of it is because, GZ Doom doesn't use pathfinding. It's a lot of smoke and mirrors, the way that the enemy AI works. But traditionally, like, if you want to make anything more complex than a boomer shooter, I think you kind of need like proper pathfinding and proper computation and like a navigation mesh that your NPCs can walk on and be restricted to. So other than that, really a lot of the things in Hedon, I'm just trying to perfect them further in the game that I'm working right now. So I don't know if there's anything else that I'm particularly proud of.
We know that Hedon is a game developed by a single person. In your case, you developed and published the game all by yourself. And you've been praised for that beyond the Steam or GOG reviews. And for those who are listening to this and those who don't know, Hedon won the second place on IndieDB Indie of the Year 2021 Player Choice, and also the Spaceship of Theseus and the CAC Awards in 2019, which for a solo dev with no previous knowledge of video game development is a lot. So, how do you promote your game as a solo indie developer with no knowledge of video game marketing? What strategies have worked for you?
Okay, where should I begin? I think it was a good idea for me to basically start on the GZ Doom forum, because obviously that's where people who are into Doom mods hang around. So yeah, you need a head start. Like you need to start to find a community of people, and everyone tells you this nowadays, right? You need to build your community. You need to build that Discord server or whatever. Yeah. So for me that helped, right? Because that was like the initial foothold that I had. The game was on the forum. People just browse the forum and they see, oh, hey, there's a new thing going on. It was interesting because, HEDON'S nature as like a completely licensed independent game, because most things that you saw back then on GZ Doom were like games that used essentially Bethesda's IP, right? Like you had Doom mods which used concepts like you had a Doom Marine, you had demons that belong to Bethesda intellectually, so to say, right now. But Hedon was this thing that was completely from scratch, right? So I think that kind of like made it interesting for some people, and they checked it out, and then they start talking about, and eventually Icarus Lives picked it up. He made a video about it, so that helped a lot. That was like a huge initial boost. And like a thing that I think people should aim for as much as possible is YouTubers and creators, but not any kind, because there's some like you have these huge multi-million view YouTubers that tend to like play your game for like half an hour and then just drop it. I think it's important again to go on with a targeted route, to go to people who have a fan base who would play the game and who are already interested. So yeah, we have there's quite a few creators. G-Man Lives, he helped a lot. He also featured the game. CV, of course. G-Man's editor, Salokin, who also has like a channel, he covered it, and that was great. I had Kirk Reviews, who was also amazing. Who else covered it? Slim Bratsky, I think he's watching the show. So hey Slim, if you're watching. So yeah, it's like I'm grateful to these people, and you definitely want. When I released Head on Bloodrite, I definitely started emailing all sorts of creators, and I went with a targeted route. Like I looked into people who were either interested in GZ or either interested in boomer shooters. When I wrote my mails, I didn't just copy paste. I like made like personalized mails. I spent like days just working on this. I had like a list of very few creators, like I think I had 10 in total, but each one of them got the respect he deserved. So but the point is just try to target, because at the end of the day you're making a niche game, right? And I think indie developers oftentimes fall into this trap where they're like trying to compete with the AAA industry. Like imagine if I was like, okay, let me make what's popular right now, Helldivers. If I make a Helldivers clone, and I've even seen like indie devs who spent years working on cloning a game that was popular, and nobody played it, and they were so frustrated because it took time and blood and sweat and effort and everything, and it's just not a good idea to compete with very big games. Like I understand the logic. It's like this game is big, so therefore I could get a fraction of that. I don't know. Like I would never do that. But with Hedon, it was just a niche game, and like if it's a niche game, just find your audience. Just look at the places that you hang out in. Look at the creators that you follow. These are the guys that you want to talk to. Another thing that helped was truly the fact that Head-On was there at the beginning of the what we refer to as the boomer shooter resurgence.
Resurgence, yeah, of course. Yeah.
So when I was working on Head-On, I only knew about Project Warlock.
Yeah, amazing.
And eventually about Dusk. Like Dusk was a huge phenomenon. Like it just
no, it's insane.
Amazing. It's like amazing. Dusk. Yeah. Dusk was like the fire that ignited the boomer shooter revolution.
Of course, and David Szymanski knows that. He knows that he made this like resurgence happen because Dusk is insane. Continue, please.
Yeah. So. What's that saying? Luck is when hard work meets opportunity.
Yeah,
I saw the opportunity. I saw it. By the time I was almost done with Head-On, I was absolutely crunching, like working non-stop. In fact, I'm in my late 20s right now, and if I look back, all my 20s, they're like a blur. Like, what the hell have I been doing this entire time? Like, other than just work and work and work. Like, I'd work easily like 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
So I really stepped on the gas. Like, I wanted to be there with the first wave. And yeah, that culminated with the first edition of Realms Deep, if you're familiar with it.
Of course.
And it's kind of crazy when I think about it, because the first edition, we had like, apart from the stuff that 3D Realms published, I think we only had like 7 games.
Yeah.
So it was like this small magical thing that essentially just blew up the next year. Like next year we had like dozens, and then in the third year there were like hundreds of games. It's crazy. And it helped a lot. I'm not sure if Head-On would have been as popular if it released yesterday. You know what I mean? Like, again, I saw the opportunity and I did my best to meet it.
Yeah.
Back to marketing. Yeah. Build your community. Try and reach out to the creators that you follow and try to carve your niche. And have fun. You're a solo dev. You don't have a publisher. You can do funny things. Like, for example, I don't have official merch, but I just made some designs and I put them up on Redbubble, because Redbubble is a very convenient way of getting them. Yeah. And, I don't even have a cut out of it. Like, I do it for free. It's just that I want to, like, at some point I even send various people like t-shirts with Head-On and stuff like that, and they take pictures of it, they put it on social media. It's just like you're trying to foster a community. There's memes, there's fan art. That's like the magic of being self-published. Really, you don't have someone that holds you accountable. So like that's probably what you take away from it. If you're like struggling to promote your game, just loosen up a bit. Maybe try to think about non-conventional ways of getting your stuff out there.
The game has very good reviews. 9 out of 10 on Steam, 7.5 on Metacritic, 4.2 out of 5 on GOG, and 4.9 on itch.io. So the game is good. That's out of the question. But of course there are always critics who don't like the game, and of course everyone is entitled to their opinion, even more so if they invested their money to buy a game and didn't like it. Having said that, how do you deal with your community, and what role do they play in your development process? How do you handle feedback, both positive and negative? The feedback, the criticism, and the player support.
So, like I said, publishing the game on Steam was a huge shift. Because up until then, what happened, since the game was, published in close circles, the people who played it obviously were like into it. They were looking forward to it. So I kind of like reached my target audience. But when you put it on Steam, you open it to like a huge audience, right? And obviously not everyone is going to like the game.
Of course.
And I think this is the tendency for a lot of indie devs to basically, as soon as they release their game, they like F5 the review page. Like they just constantly wait for new reviews to appear, to come in. And at least that's how I was. Like, as soon as the review would come in, I was like instantly at work on the game, right? Like someone said that they want this feature or that feature, and I was like, oh, okay, let's work on it.
Yeah.
And I now when I look back at it, I think what you should do is you should have a more analytic approach to feedback. And I think one trick you can do is just wait for a clump of reviews to pile up. Like, let's say you've released your game, just wait for the first 20 reviews to show up. I know it's gonna be hard, but when you have 20 reviews, you're gonna go over them, right? You're gonna go over the negative ones and the positive ones, and then you'll start seeing patterns, right? And that's what you wanna address first. Like, what issues do most people have? And then, of course, you have to process it in an analytic rather than emotional manner. So you have to detach yourself from what might look like a legitimate concern and think about the greater picture, right? Think about the core design of your game and what you're trying to achieve, and try to stick to it. Don't bend your knee to people, because you might just end up patching your game and it will look like a different game and it might not be that fun. So ever since, okay, now I'm not gonna date this, but in the last years, I feel like we all kind of know what constitutes good and bad game design, right?
Yeah.
There are certain rules, and people really want rules. They want theory. They want something that can stick to, like a recipe, right? And especially the AAA industry. The AAA is all about recipes nowadays. And some of these good game design ideas will bar you from making interesting things. Now, let me explain. Here's an example. A good game design cue is to not allow the player to get lost, right? A lot of people will tell you that if the player gets lost, then you failed. It's like bad game design. So what's the easiest way to alleviate that? Well, you start putting objective markers, you put an arrow, you start painting stuff yellow. Like you start doing all these things that, in my opinion, they're like almost condescending to the player. Like you're treating the player like an infant, right? Because you want the player to enjoy his little experience and then just leave a happy review at the end of it. But when you look at Hedon, like, what's the first experience that you have in the caves? You get lost, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, if you're a solo dev and if you're making a niche games, just go ahead and explore conventional bad game design, right? Like,
Yeah.
Sure, you get lost, but at the same time, just being lost in that cave, maybe you get to like hear the ambient, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You see the colors. It allows you to be immersed in it. And then at the end of it, it's basically what I call aesthetic game design. It's like, have the player suffer, and if they suffer and they figure their way out, they're gonna be way more satisfied than they would have been if they just followed like a line on the ground, right? And just have everything spoon-fed to them. It's that idea that sometimes certain impediments just make the rewards sweeter, right? So yeah, that's food for thought right there. Like, maybe try exploring some quote-unquote bad game design and allow yourself to stand out from the mainstream, from the AAA industry. So yeah, obviously, at the end of the day, not everyone's gonna like your game, but that's fine. Like, it's fine. Not everyone has to like your game.
Yeah.
I don't understand why people freak out about it. Now, of course, there's a mistake that I made head on, and it took me quite some time to realize, and that's the first impression.
Yeah.
The first impression of the game is not the main menu. By the way, the main menu is the one of Doom. If you wonder why people call it a Doom clone, it's because I never bothered to change the layout. You know, if you play Selaco or like some like a Relentless Frontier, that's a GZ Doom game that released in early access recently, you'll see that they have their own menu layout, right? They did like the work to change the engine. But I was like, hey, this menu works just fine. Why would I change it? That's a waste of time. But see, some people will look at it and they're like, oh, but this is just like a reskin of the Doom menu. Like, what's the matter? Another issue is the cover art. So the cover art is high octane stuff, man. It's like there's this buff demon chick with like a pain gun, fire behind it, and the main menu is like metal music, and it's like, oh hell yeah, let's go, let's start killing. This is Serious Sam. This is like a slaughter map, and that's not to say. Yeah, that's not to say that Hedon isn't like that. In fact, I think there's a level that has like 600 monsters on it. So
yeah. It's insane. Yeah.
But see that I think it fails to set the proper it fails to convey the proper message. And now, honestly, I've been thinking about how on earth would I remake the cover art so that it better conveys like the more adventure and toned down and atmospheric side of the game. And a last point that I want to make on processing feedback, and this is probably the most important thing that I have to say, is watch people play your game. Okay, but when I was doing closed testing with Hedon, I was just handing it out to friends, and I was like, just record. I don't care, with or without voice, just send me a recording, whether it's good or bad. You can learn so much from it. It's insane. And I watched people who had a great time playing. I watched people who didn't get it. I watched people who had well, you can't really have a bad time if you play through the entire game. But I watched people who played, and at the end of the game, they said that they would not recommend the game, right? And yeah, that's just the best kind of feedback you can get. Like, just see how the player interfaces with your creation, real time. Don't just listen to what they say, because sometimes they don't even know. Like I said, everyone is a game designer, right? Yeah. Everyone has an idea on how to make the game better, but your core principles, and you can keep them as a base layer, and then just internalize what you're seeing, and sort of like improve your game without turning it into a different game, like while retaining that thing that made it special on release, right?
Of course.
Yeah, watch people play your game. That's the best.
Yeah.
And again, just be analytic about it. Don't be. I know it's hard, but don't be emotional. Okay, don't. I don't even reply to like reviews. I'm not even sure if it's a good or a bad idea, but it is what it is, man. Some people are gonna like it, some not.
Of course.
Like, I'm just amazed that there are so many people who like it, and if it's not broken, I'm not gonna touch it.
Of course. Getting back to the game, art-wise, the game is incredible. The color palette has great contrast, the weapons, the sprites, everything has its place. We know that you studied architecture, and on a functional level it's quite noticeable when you play and how everything is connected. So, do you think that if you had not studied architecture, the game would have been made or would have the same impact?
First of all, I'm not sure if Hedon would even exist. Architecture was not necessarily about the skills, but it's like it's a very tough university here, and it kind of like instills a sense of hardiness in you. Like it's I like to joke that it's kind of like a military training. Like it's physically and psychologically exhausting to a point where it like just makes you tougher. And I think it gives you discipline. That's the word I was looking for. It gives you the proper discipline that's required to be a solo dev and to get a project from point A to point B, because that's kind of like the worst thing, lack of motivation, or just not having the discipline to release a game that's plaguing a lot of people who are trying to get into the indie dev. So definitely helped in it's kind of funny because in some way it also maybe limited my imagination, because obviously so in Hedon, a lot of the buildings, if not all of them, or at least most of them, they have structures, right? They have like structures as they would in real life. One example is the mansion. in Bloodrite, the second level.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter in a game. There's no earthquakes. It's not gonna fall apart. You can do whatever you want. See, but I was constrained by my prior knowledge, and maybe that kind of like made me not realize my full potential with that level. You know, it made me. There was something that was bugging my head about the layout of that building, and yeah, you definitely have to, like I said, to be open to new ideas and to sort of like learn the capabilities of the tools that you're working with and maybe use them to their best extent. But, you know, at the same time, who knows, maybe someone will look at that and appreciate the fact that I cared about the engineering aspect of that building. You know, you're gonna have the super geeks, the super fans who dig into every little crevice of your game and every little bit of lore and every bit of. They'll have a field day for sure. They'll enjoy that, just like you enjoyed the aspect of the dwarf town.
That was the dwarfs. Yeah, that was the term. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely helped in more than one way.
The video game industry, like any industry, has its ups and downs, and we know well that lately there have been many layoffs from quite large companies due to inflation, internal problems, poor management of the company, etc. So, having said that, are there any trends or changes in the industry that you are or excited about or concerned about?
Honestly, I just don't care that much about the industry. Like the name itself, industry, you know, some people might say that I'm full of crap, but I really like to think of games like art. I really do. I like to think of them as art and as culture. And one of my dreams is that 100, 200, 500 years from now, someone will be able to pick up one of my games and be like, what were these people doing 500 years ago? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of my, maybe it's a foolish dream, but I'll do my best to achieve it. So how do I feel about the industry? Like the industry is going to be an industry. People say that there's no more good games, but that's because they only play FIFA.
Of course.
What do we do about these people, right?
Yeah.
Well, maybe FIFA is not, because again, it's like a football game. Like how bad can you make it unless you like fill it with microtransactions and gambling and all sorts of garbage? But
of course,
again, people need to start investing effort into finding games, comic books, films, whatever that are not mainstream. They need to branch out. And honestly, man, like I'm thinking about only the games that I played this year. Like I played Selaco. Selaco's amazing. Insane. You know, it's like I feel spoiled that we have these games nowadays.
Yeah.
You know, so it's funny to me to think that some people are, you know, like, oh God, what game I'm not? They're all terrible. What am I gonna play?
Yeah.
Well, do some research. It will help you.
Of course.
Obviously, there's this whole thing with the AI right now, and it's definitely got me. I'm not sure. I'm not a Luddite. Like, in a way, I kind of like accept the fact that AI will be part of
everything.
This medium. I don't like it. I really would prefer a world without it, but what are you gonna do about it? Obviously, I'm gonna stay as far away as possible from it. And even with Hedon, I had this very handmade approach, and now I'm even more convinced that I want to uphold this handmade thing because I'm certain that people will appreciate it. You know, in maybe 10 years from now, 20 years, if who knows, maybe AI won't even be successful because as far as I see, everyone just hates it, man. It's like,
yes.
You have to ask yourself, it's okay, it's a progress in technology, but will it make us happier? The apparition of the mobile phone, I'd say it made us happier because we could get in touch with our loved ones and so on and so forth. But then again, the phone turned into the smartphone. And I constantly ask myself, did the smartphone, despite being this huge technological progress, did it really make us happier? Or did it just solve some problems only to create other problems, right? And it's the same way I'm thinking about AI. Will it solve more problems than it will create. Who knows?
Of course.
But yeah, again, I feel like even more convinced that I want to uphold and perfect this handmade approach, and I'm sure that there will be plenty of people who will appreciate it.
Yeah.
So well, before we finish this interview today, San, is there anything you would like to say to your fans and or followers?
Well, I guess be patient. I am hard at work, and I hope that, even if I'm not making head-on, like I said, a lot of the things that worked with head-on, and not the things that I found that worked, but things that I received feedback that they worked. So, as you said, story, things like that, I'm really trying to further them into the game I'm making right now together with Puppy. It's going to be in the Godot engine, and it's very difficult, right? So you know how it was. It's like the Godot engine, maybe it's going to be great one day, but right now it's still, for all intents and purposes, beta. And it's kind of crazy that we almost didn't have the tools to make this game. And it's kind of crazy, again, when I think about GZ Doom, just how much faster everything was in GZ Doom compared to this. And yeah, it's definitely way more workload. So yeah, if you're a fan of head-on, again, just be patient and stay tuned. I guess you're not gonna see news anytime soon. Right now we're hoping to have maybe like a vertical slice or some sort of working prototype by the end of the year. A lot of the time I've spent so far was essentially learning stuff like 3D modeling, 3D animation, learning how to work with this engine to some extent, designing things. When you're a solo dev, everything is in your head. You don't need to design, but when you're working together with a programmer, you need to like lay things on paper essentially and instruct him to some extent. A lot of design. And I hope that now we're going to start slowly shifting into the production phase, and who knows, maybe if we have a vertical slice and everything works, then I'll be able to start sharing some sneak peeks. But yeah, until then, be patient.
Again, thank you very much for sharing with us today. We really appreciate your time, and please follow San on social media, on Twitter and Patreon, and please buy Head on Bloodrite on Steam or GOG. It is a pleasure. My name is Juan Jose. San, thank you again, and we hope to have you back on the show soon. And to anyone who is listening or watching to this, thank you very much. See you soon.